feel like the chances of the United States will not be pulled into a wider war in the Middle East. That was a long one. I'm Johnny DeRolla. Today on the Young Turks Power Panel, we are joined by two awesome people who have been specifically chosen for their views on politics and also their ability to speak to the rise of AI in comedy, which we'll be getting to later on in the show. First of all, Trey, great to have you on. We recently talked on TDR. Great to have you here as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Me and my mustache. Glad to be here today.
Thank you. You brought a lost one.
I did, yeah, my +1, that's right.
Great to have you here. And Francesca Fiorentini as well. Francesca, thank you for being here.
Yeah, so good to be here. Happy Friday, although we're gonna get into I feel like we're getting into serious stuff.
Kind of. It's on like that side of the line of serious. Your invocation of a happy Friday is the last happiness that we will have for some time. That's not entirely true. There's a little bit of good news. Donald Trump owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to journalists, which is just a great sentence. I wish I could say it all the time. And I do think that our talk about the future, perhaps, of comedy and AI should be interesting. But that said, there's chaos going on in the world, everyone. And so with no other prelude, we do need to get into it, take stock of the state of the world. So why don't we do that, starting with this?
Israel's efforts both to mitigate harm when conducting operations, as well as its efforts to alleviate suffering through humanitarian activities, have gone relatively unnoticed and dispel, or at the very least mitigate, against any allegation of genocidal intent.
You saw there just part of hours of the defense that Israel provided against charges of genocidal intent before the International Court of Justice. Yesterday, we had South Africa pleading its case. Today, the response from Israel, and we're gonna dive into it. Understand that you could watch the entire thing if you want. It is available, it's hours long, so buckle up. But the main tactic largely that Israel sought to defend itself was very similar to the way that Israeli government and military officials have been talking about the conflict since October 7th. Basically focusing less on what the IDF has done or the deaths of civilians, the destruction of infrastructure, and more on what was done by Hamas on October 7th. You're gonna see an example of that in this clip.
Johnny Simantov, a wheat farmer, and his wife Tamar, an activist for women's rights, lived in kibbutz Nir Oz. When the rocket fire started, they hid in the safe room with their 4-year-old son Omer and their 6-year-old twins Arbel and Shachar. During their rampage, Hamas militants set fire to their house. Johnny texted his sister Renee, "They're here. They're burning us. We're suffocating." The whole family was burned alive to ashes, making DNA identification especially difficult. A survivor of the Nova Music Festival massacre testified to police to witnessing a Hamas militant brutally raping a young woman, as another militant cut off her breast and toyed with it.
So stories like that are absolutely horrific. I cannot imagine that happening. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories exactly like that. But they have been presented. This is, of course, not new evidence. We've known of these horrors for some months. And of course, if one is going to make the case that the horrors that were inflicted on Israelis on October 7th is a defense against the charges of genocide in the months since, then one would have to do that, and that has not been presented. It is simply a presentation of other horrors that were inflicted that do not provide a moral justification if what is being claimed is that Israel is pursuing genocide, which is the case that South Africa is making. Now, that was not the only defense, bringing up what Hamas has done that the Israeli defense provided here. You also have a sort of counter accusation against both Hamas and South Africa that they are the ones with genocidal intent against Israel.
The attack on Israel on the 7th of October was qualitatively different from all that went before. The truth is that if there has been any genocidal activity in this situation, it was the events of 7th of October. As South Africa has pointed out, complicity in genocide is in play. States that supported, condoned, praised, or glorified the events of the 7th of October, both at the time and later, stand guilty of a violation of Article 3E of the Convention as being complicit in genocide, and indeed of the duty to prevent genocide under Article 1. And as the agent has pointed out, South Africa has given succor and support to Hamas, at the least.
It is a matter of public record that South Africa enjoys close relations with Hamas, despite its formal recognition as a terrorist organization by numerous states across the world. These relations have continued unabated even after the October 7th atrocities. South Africa has long hosted and celebrated its ties with Hamas figures, including a senior Hamas delegation that incredibly visited the country for a, quote, solidarity gathering just weeks after the massacre.
So they made reference there to a longstanding history between South Africa and Hamas, in particular focusing on the fact that there was a delegation of senior Hamas figures who participated in the 5th Global Convention of Solidarity with Palestine, which was held in South Africa, which certainly doesn't look good if you were having members of this group who just, less than a couple of months ago engaged in these absolutely barbaric acts. That doesn't look good for your state. Now, South Africa has defended themselves against those claims. Obed Bapela, the deputy chairperson of the ANC National Executive Committee Subcommittee on International Relations, told reporters that it was important to share South Africa's struggle and engage with all parties, and said, "We haven't declared Hamas a terrorist organization in South Africa, so we're free to engage with everybody and every organization in Palestine." Which that doesn't seem like much of a defense to me. I mean, the counter argument would be you should label them a terrorist organization, if not before October 7th, certainly after October 7th. They do say that South Africa has not condoned the acts of October 7th in official statements from the state. They have condemned them and said while the ANC didn't condone violence, any persons oppressed anywhere in the world, they've got the right to take any means available for them to liberate themselves. If it means violence meted against those oppressing others, let it be. We've been through it ourselves, but always leave space for negotiations. Again, I don't think that that's going to help public perceptions of the relationship between South Africa and Hamas, considering what was done on October 7th. But again, all you are perhaps pointing out here is that South Africa is morally in the wrong as well. It doesn't just cancel out the claims that are being made about the way that the IDF and the Israeli government is prosecuting this war. So this seems at worst to be merely distraction. At best, it makes other people and organizations look bad, but it isn't actually a defense against the claims that are being made. And we'll get more into those claims and the evidence for them. But Francesca, I want to start with you. What do you think about Israel's defense of itself before the ICJ?
I mean, I think it's exactly what you said. It's a massive distraction. It's a whataboutism. It's like, but what about Hamas? Have you condemned Hamas? It has no actual bearing on the evidence that was provided by the South African lawyers on whether there was mass killing, whether there is mass killing, whether there is a destruction of healthcare systems. I'm going through their points: forced displacement, food blockades, bodily and mental harm, and preventing Palestinian births, all of which support genocidal intent and actual crimes of genocide that South Africa brought. It's basically, oh, you engage with the political wing of Hamas. Let's remember, Hamas, whether you like them or think that, yeah, they have terroristic elements, there are two elements. There is a militant wing, there is a political wing, right? That's just how it works. I'm not condoning it at all, but that's how it works. The other thing is South Africa has a longstanding relationship, not with Hamas, with the Palestinian people. Nelson Mandela, in the struggle for freedom against apartheid in South Africa, said that our freedom is linked to the freedom of the Palestinian people. Why? Because they understood then, as we understand now, that the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza live under occupation. They live without their full freedoms. They live without ability to access land, water, sea, control their own electricity, control their own healthcare systems. Final point here, if what Israel is doing, which is basically saying, I'm not the genocider, you are. I know you are, but what am I? Which is literally their entire defense. then they should bring Palestine to the ICJ. Oh, wait a minute. Palestine doesn't exist. In fact, instead, it's occupied territories that you control, that you are now raining terror and murder upon. So that's what's actually happening. So in effect, this is all kind of a show that ultimately reveals that we need a Palestinian state and Palestinians need actual representation.
Yeah, well, I kind of alluded to this before we started. Like, I feel a little absurd talking about a topic this serious with this ridiculous thing on my face. You know what I mean? Like, as a comedian, I don't exactly relish the subject of genocide, comedic goldmine that it is. But so, yeah, I don't know how to, I don't know what to do here. I get weird about these things that are truly horrific because that's kind of all there is to say about it. I agree with everything Francesca said about the massive whataboutism that is this defense. I agree with that. It's like, but what about what they did? It was real bad too, and that's not a defense like both of you said. I thought, not to give myself any credit here, but as soon as October 7th happened, and the details came out and whatnot, I was like, well, this is horrible. That warrants a response. There's going to be a response. But I'm also kind of worried that response is going to be maybe a little over the top and might turn a little genocide-y at some point, just because of, history and things about it, right? And then now, here we are. That's what's happened. I'm not down with Hamas or what they did remotely, but at a certain point, it feels like you should probably rein it in if you're Israel. And they just won't, they immediately start with the whataboutism and the claims of anti-Semitism and all that, and they just won't give any ground at all on what they're doing over there. And that's, disappointing is not a strong enough word for it, but yeah.
Yeah. You saw the British lawyer for Israel there, Malcolm Shaw, saying that the Hamas attack on October 7th was qualitatively different than any prior attack, which it was. It was shocking. It shocked the international conscience. But has the bombing of Gaza not been qualitatively different than any prior attacks from the IDF on Gaza as well, or qualitatively different than October 7th? I mean, look, the case that is being made, without, I would say, the courage to say it, you're making it, but you don't want to say it, is that because so many people died on October 7th, and because they died in such objectively horrific ways that the mind cannot focus on them for too long because they're simply too terrible, that justifies some number of civilian deaths. And the question that will not be answered is how many? It obviously justified killing as many innocent Palestinians as innocent Israelis died, according to the people who are making the case, again, without actually stating it. Justified 5,000 deaths, it justified 10,000 civilian deaths, and deaths that are just as horrific. An 8-year-old being blown to pieces. We may not have the editorials breaking down these individual stories, but they can't be DNA tested either when a building is blown apart with a 2,000-pound bomb and your entire family has been crushed and cannot be recovered. Like, that is horror too. How many does it justify 50,000 civilians dying? Does it justify 250,000 civilians dying? Where is the line drawn where the horror calculus that is being done behind the scenes no longer makes sense? And that you simply cannot get an answer to that. Just more. We know it justifies more. 1,000 this week, 1,000 the week after. Maybe things will improve a little bit. Maybe they'll get a little bit worse, but tons and tons and tons more people. And it seems ridiculous that you can make that case without even having the courage to say, I don't care how many. It really doesn't matter because of what happened. That's what fundamentally bothers me. Any quick response before we move on to other parts of what's happening at the ICJ?
I mean, the stories that they're recounting on an international stage, South Africa could recount and go, and we could just have a contest and we could name, oh, here is a mentally disabled child mourning his mother who's just been gunned down and just died under the rubble. Oh, here is a baby who has his face intact, but his brain has been completely hollowed out. Like, let's keep going. Let's go and see who ends last. Like, is that the game that Israel wants to play? Because my guess is Palestinians are gonna win that game just this week, right? 4 Red Crescent workers, hospital workers, were in an ambulance with 2 patients trying to escape, trying to leave, trying to flee. They were aerially struck by Israel. So we can play this game, and Israel clearly wants to play it, and they're gonna be losing. Last thing I'm gonna say on this is they're scared. Israel is absolutely scared of South Africa bringing this case against them. That's why they showed up. They don't bother to show up to a lot of these international hearings. They don't care when it comes to flaunting international law. They've done it time and time again. Their occupation is illegal. They're scared because economically, they don't want powerhouses like South Africa, like Brazil, to blockade them. They're scared of boycott. They're scared of divestment. They're scared of sanctions. And that is hopefully what is to come.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just keep it simple. I don't personally, I don't like it when civilians are wantonly murdered like this. And I think that, like you said, there should be an end to it. And right now it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight. And that makes it untenable to me. So, got to figure something out at some point.
Well, why don't we jump into a little bit more of what was presented by the Israeli defense. Lawyers for Israel at the ICJ took particular issue with the fact that South Africa, in their presentation, focused on statements that Israeli officials had made that hinted at what they considered to be genocidal intent. Here is the lawyer for Israel talking about that.
To produce random quotes that are not in conformity with government policy, produced as describing is misleading at best. Such as the statement by the Minister of Heritage, for example, who is completely outside the policy and decision-making process in the war.
Okay, so the issue there is being presented as these statements are not admissible or can't be said to get to the frame of mind of the Israeli government because they're being made by people who are no longer in power, except that they are not all being made by people who are no longer in power. Some of the quotes that South Africa used are people who are still very close to power. So we're gonna go to a few of those. So first of all, here is an example from Israeli President Isaac Herzog.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. But we're at war. We are at war. We're at war we are defending our homes. We're protecting our homes. That's the truth. And then when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we break their backbone.
Okay. Every Palestinian is responsible, all of them, for what was done and for the fact that they did not cast the shackles of Hamas off of them. So to, maybe the parents of an 8-year-old who was blown apart by an Israeli bomb, your 8-year-old should have done something about Hamas. They really should have overthrown that organization. That is what the Israeli president said, not someone who served as Secretary of Agriculture back in the 90s, the Israeli president. Here is Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant. This is on October 9th.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
For those who are listening to the podcast, the translation of that is, we are imposing a complete siege on the city of Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. Several days later, this is on October 13th, he said, Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. That is the defense minister for Israel, not in the 70s, right now. So again, look, in addition to all of the facts on the ground of what has been done, and much of it was presented by South Africa, over 23,000 dead, 2/3 of them women and children. 4% of Gaza's population has died. A measurable percentage of the entire population has already died. A far, far, far higher percentage has been driven from their homes that are now destroyed and there's nothing to be to return to. 70% of the infrastructure of Gaza has been destroyed. More journalists have been killed in Gaza than any other war over the last century. There isn't a hospital in Gaza that has not been struck by attacks. This is not an accidental bombing of one thing that the international community is focusing on. Every single hospital has been struck. And as you were pointing out, Francesca, not only journalists are being killed, but international aid workers and medical professionals are being killed in large numbers as well. And the moral and rhetorical defense for that is being made, not just by people who are on the extreme fringe of Israeli government or past governments, but by people who hold power right now, people involved explicitly with the defense of Israel saying this. Francesca?
No, 100%. And I think one of the most memorable and chilling moments from what South Africa presented was that those comments that are made by the president, by Benjamin Netanyahu, prime minister, saying things like, the Amalek, invoking this biblical reference to a people that must be destroyed, that hurt you, so you must root out their seed and whatnot. That was then echoed in chants by IDF soldiers on the ground as they are relishing in, there are no innocent civilians, we will destroy the seed of Amalek. In other words, and one of the points that South Africa makes is also when you're trying to kill future generations, you're engaging in genocide and leaving newborn babies to die, depriving them of their incubators and the electricity they need to survive. I mean, these are genocidal war crimes, right? That is what they set out to prove, and they did it. So it doesn't matter all the PR. It doesn't matter, oh, but Hamas, oh, but this, oh, but, and by the way, a lot of the atrocities that, yes, there were atrocities on October 7th, a lot of the atrocities have now been proven to have not, some of them didn't happen. There weren't babies slaughtered and beheaded. That just didn't happen. There was a pregnant woman taken hostage. There wasn't a baby slaughtered. That just didn't happen. So again, like, this game of smoke and mirrors continues, and yet South Africa is staying the course and saying, here is our evidence. Your own soldiers, your own leaders are showing it, to say nothing of your actual actions.
Yeah, I mean, all that talk about like we're going to continue until their backs are broken. It's like, well, when are you going to be satisfied that has happened? You know what I mean? And then right after that, talk about like, oh, we've gotten rid of everything, no water, no fuel, no electricity, none of that. And then just this rhetoric, you calling them animals and talking about eliminating everything. Like, it doesn't not sound genocide-y, you know what I mean? And like it's like they're like, well, we got to keep going until we root out all this extremism. But like, of course, this is going to just create more extremism. It's a never-ending feedback loop, right? So like, what is the end goal then? I mean, isn't it just, when is it ever going to stop? When they're all gone? Because there's a word for that. You know what I mean? Because like, if that's not what the end goal is, then what is it? It kind of, I don't know if this maybe this is a reach, but it kind of reminds me about, as an American, when I have arguments with conservatives about like, they say that no taxpayer dollars should be used to pay for like poor people's health care or food stamps or any of that type of thing. And then you ask them like, so you think we should just allow poor people to die then? That's what should happen? And they'll all be like, no, of course not. I'm not saying that. And it's like, well, what are you saying then? Because there's only, that's the only way that can go, right?
They should die, but I don't want to hear about it, Trey. It's like,
I don't want to say it.
Right. Well, this feels like a similar scenario to me. You know what I mean? It's like there's really only one like tenable result for Israel here. And it seems like genocide, but they're never gonna acknowledge or admit to that. You know what I'm saying? So
well, and in addition to the quotes that we've provided about, the willingness to just have all of the buildings be destroyed, the people wiped out, there's also, and TYT and other shows on the network, including TDR, have talked recently about the increasing talk about just forced movement, voluntary immigration, or voluntary insofar as there is nothing there anymore. So, hey, you've been bombed to the border with Egypt. Maybe you just keep heading in that direction. That's what it's feeling like. And we will see. Look, there's obviously a lot more that can be said about this. I'm going to end with, if we could go ahead to our last video and get to one of, I think, the more ludicrous arguments that was made was that many of the buildings that are falling apart aren't falling apart as a result of bombing. It's actually something else. Take a look at this.
Damage to civilian structures is another fact claimed by South Africa as evidence of genocide. But South Africa does not consider the sheer extent to which Hamas uses ostensibly civilian structures for military purposes. Houses, schools, mosques, UN facilities and shelters are all abused for military purposes by Hamas, including as rocket launching sites. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels dug by Hamas under populated areas in Gaza often cause structures above to collapse.
And that last, much of that we've heard a million times over. You can strike literally anywhere you want because Hamas has used it, which I'm sure in many cases is true. But isn't that an amazing get out of jail free card to commit horrific acts that now every schools, hospitals, they're all fair targets. But that lawyer went beyond that to say the ground is dug out behind the building, but under the buildings. That causes them to collapse. The fact that a bomb was dropped in the building is a coincidence. It's neither here nor there. No, it's just that the ground was unstable because there were so many tunnels underneath it. Like we know the state of infrastructure in Gaza. We know what it looks like there. The idea that the chief problem is not one of the most concentrated bombing campaigns that the earth has seen since World War II. It's that the ground is riddled with tunnels seems insulting. Quick final thoughts before we go to break, Francesca.
Yeah, 2,000-pound bombs, guys, 2,000-pound bombs. Oh, I'm sorry that their infrastructure can't withstand that. No, this is what you're trying. You are trying to wipe Gazans off the map and Gaza off the map. And it is going to be, it's very fun. It's a fun exercise to see how Israel tries to defend itself. But I just want to say hats off once again to South Africa, the place that successfully defeated apartheid and then is now leading a charge to stop and defeat apartheid and genocide elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought about trying to make a joke about that earlier about it being appropriate that it's South Africa because if anybody knows apartheid, but then I thought, but that's unironically true, and they do seem qualified to talk about this. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I don't know. I hope it gets better over there soon. I don't know what else to say. I'm sure that's not going to happen. Go ahead, John.
Fingers crossed, because every day that goes by, more and more people die. Regrettably, and that should be the international goal, is to end that. We don't want to see any more civilians die. I don't want to see Palestinian civilians die. I don't want to see Israeli civilians die. And the path that the region is on is one of just almost mind-boggling suffering and destruction. We're going to take a short break, come back with somewhat lighter material. Welcome to the social break, everyone. Let's see what's been going on out there. First of all, Cody the epilepsy dragon says, Trey, hashtag squirrel lives matter, skew.
Yeah, we don't have time for me to explain all that to you guys, but thanks.
You have it,
Some inside podcast baseball here.
Yeah.
But I love to see it. Let's see. Mad Native Dragon says, Israel, they killed our civilians, so we will kill 20,000 of their civilians. Yeah, sure, that sounds reasonable. Well, it doesn't sound reasonable when you say it out loud, which is why they don't. Mm-hmm. Again, there's so much that is argued but not said in politics. Okay, let's see. JYPZ Rock says, do civilized countries set their moral standards at the level of terrorists? Then what is the difference between them?
Yes.
Often, yes. I mean, look, it brings me back to a lot of what many Americans were perfectly willing to see America do in the wake of 9/11. They were perfect, like they killed our people. It doesn't matter if 400,000 civilians die in Iraq. We can do whatever we want. And it was wrong then, and we spoke out against it then, and we should be doing the same here. Okay, sorry, members' comments. Jerry says, don't put yourself down, Trey. You speak with way more moral clarity than most Western leaders. Also, you're absolutely rocking the stash.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Not everybody agrees. Not every commenter. You guys would be surprised to hear. Some people on the internet more negative.
Not a fan.
Generally,
I'm not a fan.
She started out before we even got on here, ripping me for it, as is her right. But anyway,
It is.
To each their own. I like it, and you definitely look better in it than I would.
Yeah, it seems like dudes like it. Women generally don't. So that seems to be the response. So,
see how that works out for you.
What I'm going for, yeah.
Gonzo Tokyo says, thanks, Franny. Yes, there are two sides of Hamas, the militants and politicians. The militants don't really listen to the politicians. South Africa are trying to engage in discussion with the politicians.
Yeah.
Yes. I still think optically, give it some time. It would be my stance, but I am not in the leadership of the ANC, as has often been noted. Art Guy says, it's nice of John to go to the trouble of dressing in a suit to go to his shed. Love seeing Trey and the lovely Francesca. Yeah, come on. It doesn't look bad for a shed, I think. I've got sound dampening in my tough shed. Anyway, Boomer Dragon Cat says, Trey, if that mustache were any more 70s porn, I think you give Tom Selleck a run for it.
Did I invoke 70s porn earlier? Because I almost did. I think maybe I didn't get to it. But yeah, me and that person were on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just, you don't want to talk to this guy about genocide. You talk to him about like IROC Z's and 70s porn. That's what I was gonna say. But I don't think I got to it.
Well, yeah, the key swap party.
Yeah, about wearing bathrobes way too long into the afternoon.
Yeah.
The Throat Goat Dragon says, we love Trey and especially his mustache. And Shadow says, awesome, it's Trey. Love it when he's on TYT. His channel is a must see. You know what else is must see? What we're gonna get to after this. Welcome back, one and all. More big news to get to. Let's jump right into it.
Overnight, a stunning barrage by US and British forces. A wave of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a US submarine and Navy ships backed by fighter jets. The target, the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen that have been attacking commercial ships in the critical Red Sea for months now.
Yes, yesterday, United States and UK forces with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands launched airstrikes at 16 different locations inside of Yemen. They say in response to the militant attacks on commercial shipping and other ships moving through the Red Sea. There's been a lot of condemnation of this action, condemnation particularly of President Biden getting the United States involved in this without going for congressional authorization. That said, Joe Biden is not backing down. He says he won't hesitate to, quote, direct further military action in Yemen if the attacks continue. And on those attacks, there have been at least 27 different Houthi attacks since November. This Tuesday, the US Navy says that they shot down 21 missiles and drones that had been fired. Many of the targets that were struck in the attacks over the last day were said to be missile launching sites and both places where drones were stored and also manufactured. 60 different locations were struck with, they say, 100 precision guided munitions. According to the rebels' military spokesperson, 5 people died and 6 others were wounded, which actually seems fairly amazing since 60 different targets were struck. But that's the numbers that are being provided as of right now by the militants. And understand that the day before the attacks, the United Nations Security Council had adopted a resolution demanding that the attacks on the ships end. Now, the Houthis had said that the attacks were in retaliation for Israel's ongoing attacks on Gaza. They said that they were targeting vessels that were either owned by Israeli companies or that were traveling to Israel. Some of the ships that were targeted apparently have no affiliation with Israel. And I want to conclude with just a little bit more from what President Biden has said about this, especially considering that there are many who are worried that this could result in long-term involvement of the United States in this conflict, which has been raging in Yemen for years at this point, and possibly drawing in other nations in the region. He said, today at my direction, US military forces successfully conducted strikes against a number of targets in Yemen used by Houthi rebels to endanger freedom of navigation in one of the world's most vital waterways. Their attacks have endangered US personnel, civilian mariners, and our partners, jeopardized trade, and threatened freedom of navigation. I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and the free flow of international commerce as necessary. He put protecting our people before the free flow of commerce. I'm going to opine that that was the thing that was being focused on, because a significant chunk of all world global shipping does travel through the Red Sea and theoretically could be targeted by the militants in the future. That said, I go to you, Trey. What do you think about this?
I mean, world police gonna world police. This is sort of what we do. It's kind of like the American overly militarized police that we have. They got all these shiny toys. They're gonna look for any excuse to use them. You know what I mean? You guys need to sympathize with that a little bit. It's like you get a new power tool or something, you kind of start wanting to break something just so you have an excuse to use it, And I feel like the DOD is generally like that. And also, just as a father of tween boys, I've been wondering how long it would take us to start our next 20-year quagmire in the Middle East. So that won't keep me up at night at all. I mean, no, I'm not looking forward to any another war, especially of the third world variety, or anything like the Third World War. That didn't work. That sounded like I meant Third War. You guys know what I mean. World War III. I don't want.
You don't want to be pulled into World War III. I get it.
World War III, whether or not it takes place also in the Third World, I got mixed up there. But anyway, I'm not. I'm not feeling overly good about any of this or the direction of it. But also, correct me if I'm wrong. These types of military operations in the Middle East and stuff. Speaking of our last quagmire, we've been doing things of this nature for quite a while now, right? I mean, we're always, we always got SEAL teams over there doing something. We're always getting up in somebody else's business, inserting ourselves. I mean, it's like I said, world police going to world police. So maybe fingers crossed, it won't necessarily escalate to the end times. But I guess we'll all find out. Francesca?
Yes, I'll take it away till the end times. No, I think, as you said, world police gonna world police, and we all know that cops get way more incensed when a store window is broken or a Louis Vuitton is raided than when Black people are gunned down by their own forces. So again, this is in defense of money. This is shipping. This is commerce. Meanwhile, 23,000 Palestinians can be murdered by Israel, and the United States will keep on funding it. More and more weapons. Let's go. Because those babies, come on now. Those babies aren't transferring, I don't know, iPhones through the Red Sea and other crap like that. So it is so clear what matters to the United States and when we'll get involved. The other thing I'm gonna say is, way to go, Saudi Arabia, man. I mean, Saudi Arabia has been fighting a war in the Houthis for many, many years. The United States has been fully funding it, leading to starvation in Yemen. And so now they've successfully brought us into a full-blown war, no proxy necessary. Iran is the ultimate goal, and Israel and Saudi have been so excited to get the United States on the Houthis' tail and also trying to go after Iran. Israel has been trying to get the United States in a hot war with Iran for so long. And man, oh man, we are closer to it than we have been in a long time.
Now, I hear both of your fears, and I know what you're worried about, us getting pulled into another like Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that. But look, that was obviously a thing of politicians and media that time around. This time around, far more measured response by the media. I tuned in to CNN and MSNBC, and they had multiple former military leaders saying that this is a good start, but something's gonna need to be done about Iran. I swear to God. Yep. Immediately they're rushing to, this isn't enough, go for Iran. I cannot believe it.
Right. Well,
that's it.
Warhawk's gonna Warhawk too. I mean,
that's the corollary.
Yep, always gonna have those people.
As I said, there are critics of President Biden's action. Congressman Ro Khanna, who I have had on the Damage Report many times over the past few years to talk about the Saudi war on Yemen, says that these strikes are unconstitutional. For over a month, he consulted an international coalition to plan them, but never came to Congress to seek authorization as required by Article 1 of the Constitution. That is true, but it's just the Constitution. Come on, it's not like Biden has ever pitched himself as a defender of the Constitution. Come on, Ro Khanna. But anyway, Mike Lee agreed with him. So they have often worked together, Ro Khanna and Mike Lee, to try to get the War Powers Act to have some actual teeth. He says that the Constitution matters regardless of party affiliation. Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan of the Congressional Progressive Caucus said it's an unacceptable violation of the Constitution. But that said, not everyone's mad. Lindsey Graham, Mike Johnson, and Mitch McConnell are all speaking Biden's praises.
Oh.
So he's got that going for him as he launches this general election campaign. So that's cool. Anyway, why don't we turn to, no, it's not gonna be lighter, but we're gonna turn to other news. Whenever you're ready, let's launch into this horror.
But here is Roger Stone speaking to his associate Sal Greco at Cafe Europa in Fort Lauderdale weeks before the 2020 election.
Be a piece there, I'm gonna go find Swalwell and get this over with. It's time to do it. Then we'll see how brave the rest of them are. Either follow up, either Swalwell or Nadler has to die before the election. They need to get the message. And just not putting up with this.
So we had learned earlier this week that Mediaite had gotten these tapes of Roger Stone plotting the assassination of multiple Democrats before the 2020 election. He had responded to that news saying, "Oh yeah, where's the tapes? You don't got any tapes. I don't hear any tapes." Well, the tapes are out. And so what does he say to that? He's claiming that it's AI generated and that's fake. Obviously, every time he's on audio or videotape calling for the murder of his political opponents, and I'm starting to forget some of those instances now. He has claimed that it's AI in every case. And I'm glad that we have the tape. I'm glad that Mediaite got it and that they released it. I particularly like it because you've got him talking about how after they've assassinated a few people, we'll see how brave the others are. He's in a cafe plotting for other men to kill people he doesn't like, and he's talking about bravery as if other people are weaklings and cowards. But anyway, I don't know if anything is gonna come of this. Trey, I go to you for your commentary. This is obviously a longtime ally of Donald Trump who could well be involved in his administration next time around.
I just love that picture that you guys had with that quote, which is the picture I've seen on the articles and stuff of him too, with those like round sunglasses. I like his dedication to being like comically villainous looking. Yeah, like that. Like he always looks like that. He looks like he should be like dipping tunes in acid in the Roger Rabbit movie or something like that. He looks like that guy. He just looks, it looks like he haunts the nightmares of all 90s kids everywhere. So it makes sense that he acts the way he does. There's also, we've had those tapes for forever of him at the morning of January 6th, walking around being like, I don't even care about the vote, like the vote to certify or whatever. He's like, forget the vote. Let's just get straight to the violence. That's what I want. We need to start cracking heads and smashing pumpkins, whatever this stuff. And then he like ran away with his tail between his legs when stuff really kicked up after that. So it's just like, it's just who he is. Also, I don't know if you mentioned it or not, but in this tape where he's saying all this, he was saying it to a guy who was an NYPD cop also, who was like a buddy of his. So that's also very much checks out and tracks. I guess that guy's since been kicked off the force, but still it's all very 2024, ain't that America sort of thing. But what I'm trying to tell myself is that Roger Stone is just who he is. He says this type of thing all the time. It doesn't mean he won't do it, but again, it's just your classic over-the-top villain character, and this is what they do.
Yeah, I mean, dude is a thug. Like, he's been a thug. Like, his whole MO has been like, oh, I'll get the ground troops, I'll get the brown shirts to support your non-democratic fascist takeover. Like, he helped with the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000, right? It's all about, which supported George W. Bush in Florida, like to stop the recount or whatever. He's like, I will lead I'm not gonna lead them. I'm gonna be in a pinstripe suit smoking a cigar, yes, looking like a Batman villain in the background. But that's what he wants to do. And he's like tossing with the Proud Boys and whatnot. This is wild. This is truly wild. And yet he is advisor to the front runner for 2024. And we're just like, yep, well, let's keep going. Iowa caucus is on Monday.
Yeah.
It still blows my mind. It will never not blow my mind, John.
That blows my mind, and I would love for a journalist, I would say maybe one of the journalists who did the town hall with Trump theoretically could have done this, but of course, they decide this whole town hall that they did with him was just them bowing down to Trump. There were no tough questions. Ask Trump the question. You always have to ask him. Do you denounce Roger Stone for calling for the assassination of multiple Democrats? It's pointless. He's not going to. He's just going to evade and slip and slide, and America will descend just a little bit farther into the bottom of the barrel. But I think it is. I think it should be a requirement for journalists to at least go through the motions in that regard. Anyway, also I love, and I'm glad, Trey, that you were focusing on the fact that it was Sal Greco as a NYPD officer. Like, you know how little you had to do in New York to be considered suspicious from the point of view of the NYPD.
Right.
You've got a guy across the table from you saying he wants to assassinate politicians. Nothing, no obligation to do anything about it. Maybe get involved, honestly. And by the way, while Roger Stone is lying and saying that this is AI, Greco's not denying that this conversation happened, and they have multiple other sources. So it 100% happened. Take it to the bank. Anyway, with that said, we do need to take our second break of the hour. But when we come back, what will the future of comedy be? And will there be a place for humans in it? We'll have that and more after this. Welcome back, one and all. Let's jump into some of your comments. Let's see. Eclectic Miscellaneous says, can they use AI to make Biden sound like he's not an incompetent, doddering neoliberal who supports genocide? Maybe with ChatGPT 5. It's supposed to roll out sometime this fall. Lynn says, and I was thinking the same thing, but I had to end the segment. Francesca, Stone is not a thug, he's a thug wannabe. Yeah, he'd love the idea that he's a thug. He's not a thug, he's the little weenie twerp that like points at someone for the bully to beat up. That's all he is. He's never
like the
taken part in any
Penguin.
of this.
He's like the Penguin, in Batman. Again, it's like,
the Penguin at least bit someone's nose off.
That's true. But like, you know how the Joker's kind of a weenie? Like Joker's like, he's out there, he's like, summoning everybody, but then he's kind of like, when he gets caught, he's like always whining and stuff.
Right.
The Mark Hamill one at the very least. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I try to, that's what, when I said, like, I just tell myself, it's just who he is. He just blusters and whatever. But then like, I used to think that about all of them. Like years ago, I'd be like, oh, they ain't going to do nothing. Just a whole bunch of keyboard warriors and all that stuff. But ever since like January 6th and whatnot, it's kind of reframed. I'm a little more trepidatious about just writing off the possibility that they'll, try to kill us all.
100%.
Because it could happen, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. Box gifted a membership to the Young Turks. Thank you for that, Box. The Progressive Moose gifted 5. Thank you. Let's see. Over on YouTube, Tiny Dancer Dragon says, great power panel. Thank you so much. Gary Cooper says, Trey, Francesca, and John, it's a Friday trifecta. Thank you. We try to set those up. Let's see. Dragoon Dragon, member for 9 months, says, a perfect end of a snow day as a teacher. I get to watch John live twice. No big deal. And Fran and Trey. Thank you. Much appreciated. Left and Oz says, that mustache looks like it lives a secret nightlife while Trey sleeps.
Yeah, it and my 2 cats just raising hell in my house.
100%. You gotta get a teddy bear cam or something. Okay, other comments. Stephen Bowen says, what was the point of Blinken clocking up the air miles, going around the region preaching no escalation? Did that mean anything at all, or does he exclude USA from no escalation?
Yes.
Well, yeah, 100%. Yeah, he does. Look, we'll see. Maybe it's a one-time cruise missile striking, but maybe we'll be doing this in a year. Spending, maybe we'll allocate another $100 billion to it. God only knows. Alex says, love you guys. I can't deal with all this state of the world stuff. I understand. Sometimes I get pretty sick of it too. Okay, let's see. I lost the section that had. Okay, well, I'll stay on this. I lost the Twitch section, unfortunately. David Morris says, hello, I'm an AI. I will be speaking for Mr. Morris today. It'll be the same as usual, but actually funny. I mean, I'm surprised that like Twitch chat and YouTube chat aren't flooded with AI bots already. I'm assuming that's probably coming, so everyone buckle up. Enjoy the community while you can. Free to Express says, right, Fran, did Israel even deny that they did any of those things? They can't. I mean, not especially. They denied sometimes why the building fell over. That's sort of like denying that you did it, but not quite. Okay, let's see. We're down to 13 seconds. Way too serious to get to in those seconds, but we have more news to come. Don't worry, everyone. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to what remains of the Young Turks Power Panel. We are going to finally lighten things up for the most part. Buckle up as we launch into this.
There's one line of work that is most threatened by AI, one job that is most likely to be completely erased because of artificial intelligence. Stand-up comedy. I know what all the stand-up comics across the globe are saying right now. I'm an artist and my art form is too creative, too nuanced, too subtle to be replicated by a machine. No computer program can tell a fart joke as good as me.
Now, that might have sounded like George Carlin, but it is not actually George Carlin. It's an excerpt from a 1-hour special called I'm Glad I'm Dead, which is the work of Dudesy. Dudesy is both an AI program which produced that George Carlin-esque thing, and also the name of a podcast hosted by Will Sasso of Mad TV and novelist Chad Kultgen. We want to give you a little bit more of the special. Take a look at this.
There you have it. Stand-up comedy is dead. Literally. I might be the first stand-up comic to be brought back from the dead by AI, but I certainly won't be the last. Richard Pryor, Joan Rivers, Bill Hicks, Robin Williams, Dick Gregory, Andy Kaufman, Moms Mabley, Sam Kinison, everybody's coming back. And we're all gonna have our own 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year streams commenting on everything that's happening in the world as it happens. AI resurrected stand-up comedians are gonna be the news anchors of the next decade, which, now that I think of it, means news anchors are probably out of a job too.
I wanted to leave that section in so that I'm not the only person or the panel who's not terrified of the future. I'm gonna go directly to you, Francesca. What do you think about this special and about the potential of AI to replace human comedians?
Yeah, it's just like George Carlin, except it doesn't sound really anything like him, and it's painfully unfunny and says something completely counter to what George Carlin would actually say. Oh, I'm relishing in the fact that I'm going to displace a bunch of comedians and news anchors because it's all gonna be dead comics. Of course, George Carlin would not be on the side of the robots should he be alive today. I think this thing is incredibly sick and super twisted, and guess what? And this is news for Trey, myself, and other comics out there. Anyone wants to do this? AI can't do jokes. They just can't, actually. Like, first of all, number one, AI is all what we feed it. And number two, I've spoken with a Google AI developer, and he was like, you know what the one thing we haven't cracked is? Jokes. We can't teach these bots to have senses of humor. Yes, because they're robots. Oh my God. But then again, Trey, probably better than some comics we've seen, you know?
Trey, I'm gonna go to you in just one sec. What you just laid out is why AI couldn't be a good comedian. You have not yet proven a case for why it couldn't be a right-wing comedian.
Yes.
I think you can probably handle most of that.
Look out.
Trey, what do you think?
I mean, you know, seeing as how I've only been on the scene for whatever 7 or so years, relatively just got here, I do expect to be forced out and annihilated by robots in the near future, just because that's how my personality is. But objectively, or really, I agree with Francesca, because I mean, you know, I've gotten on there. I bet a lot of us have. I've gotten on there and toyed with it. You know, I've asked ChatGPT, you know, who Trey Crowder is, and it gets it right. He's a comedian who's, you know, stupid hillbilly, but uses big words, whatever. He was correct. And then I was like, and then I said, you know, tell me a joke in the style of Trey Crowder, and it came back with it was like,
oh God,
why did the liberal chicken cross the road to get to the protest, y'all? Right, and that was it. And it made me want to kill myself. But
solid. You should open with that.
Sounds just like me. I know. But anyway, so like the other part. So I agree with what Francesca said. I don't think it's there yet. I'm not discounting the possibility that it could get there because of how exponentially technology advances and whatnot. That part freaks me out. I do not think it's there yet. I think this special is kind of proof of that, because I agree with what she said about it too. The only other thing that I'll say about it is the one thing that gives me some solace is I think that any comedian would tell you it's great to listen to specials on the radio or whatever, or watch them on your TV and all that. But at the end of the day, like stand up, everybody knows who likes it or does it. Stand up is best physically in the room with other people and the comedian at the club or at the theater or whatever, with everybody in the same room together. And I don't know, I guess with holograms or something, we could get there eventually. But I think that is the main thing to me that'll keep this from, happening in the near future. Because I don't see that.
Matt Rife is probably AI, right, Trey?
Yeah, I suppose it could be. Yeah. I don't know if AI would have done that domestic abuse joke or not. So, but either way.
They usually have bigger
open with the chicken
predictions
joke
on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to give statements from Kelly Carlin, daughter of George Carlin, who said, "My statement regarding the AI generated special. My dad spent a lifetime perfecting his craft from his very human life, brain, and imagination. No machine will ever replace his genius. These AI generated products are clever attempts at trying to recreate a mind that will never exist again. Let's let the artist's work speak for itself. Humans are so afraid of the void that we can't let what has fallen into it stay there." She clarified that there was no permission granted by the Carlin family for this to be done, and then concludes with, "Here's an idea. How about we get some actual living human comedians to listen to? But if you want to listen to the genuine George Carlin, he has 14 specials that you can find anywhere." She went on to tag Zelda Williams and Melissa Rivers, daughters of Robin Williams and Joan Rivers, and said, "We should talk. They're coming for you next," which they 100% are. I don't even mean dudesy or whatever, but yeah, they're coming for every area. Valve, which controls Steam, which is the largest digital distribution platform for games, is now allowing AI-powered games on their platform. There's a very popular hit video game that uses AI-generated voices. SAG-AFTRA is penning a deal with a voice generation studio that uses AI. Journalist Jeff Jarvis testified before the US Senate about the need to protect the rights of AI journalists. Look, will they be good? Will they be funny? Maybe not, but there's a lot of corporations that are much more interested in replacing humans than producing good stuff. And so I remain concerned. But hopefully, even if there's a flood of terrible comedians on digital platforms, Francesca, we will always have artisanal comedy from people like you and Trey in physical form.
Yeah, there already is a flood of bad comedians on streaming platforms. You can see them all the time. John, the one thing I want to say, because we talk about AI a lot, but I was learning from my podcast, Habituation Room, where I had Paris Marks on, that AI also is incredibly resource intensive when it comes to fresh water, electricity, things to cool down these mass processing centers. We think that it's like there's no footprint. No, it's exactly like crypto. To mine crypto is incredibly intensive. Same thing with these AI generated BS that, again, guys, it's just someone getting high in their room writing down ideas. Trey, it's a dude with a mustache just riffing. Like, we don't need a lot. Also, you can really, you probably have to pay AI more than you pay an average stand-up comic to do comedy. Let's be honest.
Generally speaking, yeah. The other thing that I wonder, this Carlin special, we're talking about it. Kelly addressed it. It got shared around and whatever, but probably just because of what the thing that it is, right? It's a AI generated George Carlin special. And everybody's, this is wild, right? Like, meaning I don't think people were watching this as a comedy special and like loving it in that context, the way that they act like George Carlin's actual specials. And I do think that distinction matters too. You know what I mean? Because at a certain point, just the novelty aspect of it will wear off. And then also, I'm too computer dumb to speak intelligently about this, but as I understand it, ChatGPT has somehow like gotten worse progressively, and it's deteriorating actually. So that's another part of it too. Like, there are things you can tell yourself if you're threatened by these things that can make you feel better and land on. Okay, we're not quite there yet. We still got some time left, at least.
Maybe in that way, ChatGPT actually could make for a good comedian, because I've noticed that a lot of comedians were really good in the 90s and the aughts, and now they're like super focused on what you can and cannot say, and they're kind of falling apart.
Well, ChatGPT blew up and then fell off, and that does seem to be the trajectory. So,
okay. That is unfortunately all the time we have. Trey, where can people follow you?
On any of your socials, it's just Trey Crowder. My name, TRAE Crowder. And then you can go to TreyCrowder.com and check out my tour dates. I'll be in Charlottesville, Orlando, Tampa, DC, Virginia, a bunch of places coming up. So come see me, TreyCrowder.com. And thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And Francesca?
Come see me in San Francisco. I'll be with Emma Vigeland of The Majority Report, formerly TYT, and Miles Gray of The Daily Zeitgeist on Sunday, January 28th at the Gateway Theater. It's part of SF Sketchfest. Tickets are selling really, really fast. Also, I'm doing stand-up. I'm doing stand-up Saturday, so come see me Saturday and Sunday. Saturday is a much smaller venue, Lost Church in San Francisco. Get tickets at SF Sketchfest, and I hope to see you guys there.
Everyone go check both of them out while human comedy is still legal. That is all the time we have for the first hour of the show. But David Schuster, Wazni Lambre will be here for the second hour, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
Meanwhile, in the Arctic, you know where this is going. You watch the Damage Report, the Arctic's on fire. Obviously, why would we be talking about the Arctic except to tell you that it's melting once again? The Republicans aren't that interested in it. I wonder why. Lift out of poverty up to 3.7 million people, including an estimated 1.3 million children. Hashtag save the children? Not if it costs money. I mean, come on.
At TYT, our mission is to boldly pursue truth, challenge the establishment, and drive positive change. At a time when corporate capture of our media, our government, and our politics is nearly absolute, everyday working people need a champion to fight for them and to push back against the powerful interests that threaten our democracy itself. At TYT, we're proudly progressive and call out corruption and duplicity wherever we see it, from Republicans, Democrats, or anyone else. And unlike mainstream news media outlets, we're not beholden to corporate advertisers, to defense contractors, to Wall Street, or to Big Pharma. We only have to answer to our audience, and for nearly 2 decades, we've accomplished that by delivering honest, timely, and insightful perspectives on the day's news without fear or favor or concern for whose toes we might step on or which powerful elites we might offend. And while we're super serious about the news, we also manage to do it in a way that is fun and lighthearted. We can do this together and serve our audience, and yes, have fun doing it.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney. We covered this story earlier and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. When educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power, it makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America.
Listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reform, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
Drop it like the temperature in the Midwest this weekend. Welcome back to a power panel on the Young Turks. I am Ravana, coming to you live from a very cold, snowy, and otherwise unpleasant Chicago. But what is pleasant is that I'm joined today by David Schuster, host on Revel HQ. David, how are you?
Ravana, it's great to be with you and Waz. What a great way to end the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And also joining us, Wozni Lambre, who's a writer at The Ringer and host of the Woke Bros podcast. Woz, how are you?
Oh, fantastic. It's amazing to be on the power panel today. Feeling extra powerful. Did a hike, trying to shed some of that holiday pounds, but I'm ready to go with you guys.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, I was just thinking, I'm feeling a little bit sore from the gym earlier, but I've got to power through it because it is a power panel. And we've got a lot of really great stories to cover in the next hour and a half. We're gonna talk about my favorite man, Mike Pillow. We're also gonna talk about how the rich aren't paying their fair share and you are well overpaying for your taxes. We're also gonna give you an update about the woman who is being unfairly prosecuted in the state of Ohio for having a miscarriage, all that and more. But let's jump right into this first story because it is a doozy. According to an alarming new analysis from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, in 41 US states, the wealthiest 1% pay lower tax rates than every other income group. Not even close to paying their fair share. And that is because the vast majority of state and local tax systems in this country are regressive, meaning that lower and middle income Americans are paying a greater share of their income than the wealthy. To illustrate what I'm talking about, let's all take a look at this graph. It shows the average effective state and local tax rate for each income group. You can see that the lowest 20% of Americans, represented by the bar on the far left, pay an average state and local tax rate of 11.3%, while the top 1% of Americans, represented by the bar all the way on the right there, pay an average rate of just 7.2%. So let's get into what that means. This means the top 1% are contributing 37% less of their income towards funding state and local services in their states than the poorest families. You know, the people who are always on CNBC and all the other financial channels and shows complaining about how they are paying way more than everybody else in taxes and how we actually need to amend the tax code to be more generous towards our millionaires and billionaires. Well, it turns out that that was all complete and utter horse crap, which we all knew already, but this is just further evidence of that. Now, some states are particularly punishing for ordinary Americans. In the 10 states with the most regressive tax structures, the lowest income 20% pay 3 times as much of their income in taxes as the wealthiest 1%. In Florida, you know, just quickly, the state that Ron DeSantis is always bragging about having no income tax and it being a great place for people to relocate to because of how generous their tax policies are, actually turns out to be one of the worst states for low income earners, but more on that from the article. In Florida, home to the nation's most regressive tax system, low income families pay almost 5 times as much as the wealthy. So it turns out that narrative he's been pushing that people are leaving California because the taxes are burdening them, working class people are relocating to Florida. Again, just a lie. Just a lie and a way to pat on the back his corporate buddies. Now, these lenient tax codes create significantly worse standards of living for everyone except for the rich. And research shows that when income growth concentrates among the wealthy, state revenues grow more slowly, especially in states that rely more heavily on taxes that disproportionately fall on low and middle income households. So how are these tax codes so backwards? Each state and locality, of course, is different, but there are some common factors that make a tax policy regressive. For example, 8 of the 10 most regressive state tax codes rely heavily on regressive sales and excise taxes, which are especially punishing for lower income Americans. Poor families pay almost 7 times more as a share of their incomes in sales and excise taxes than the best off families, and middle income families pay almost 5 times the rate of the wealthy. On average, low income families pay 7% of their incomes in sales and excise taxes. Middle income families pay 4.8% of their incomes. And the top 1% pay 1%, but they never stop complaining about that 1%. And I have an example of this in action here in my state of Illinois. But before I get to that, I want to bring it to you guys, and I'll start with you, David. We talk about the inequality and we talk about how the system is broken to benefit the wealthy, but I think this really just analysis from this institute really lays out clearly how much the narrative has been constructed to benefit the wealthy and how much lower income people have been tricked to think that they benefit when taxes are slashed.
I think it's also a reflection of what's happened over the last 20 years in terms of state politics. We talk at the federal level about how wealthy corporations and wealthy individuals have so much lobbying power. Well, about 20 years ago, a lot of Republicans and conservatives started focusing their firepower at the state houses and were able to change a lot of state laws and tax laws, and now we've seen the result. And the second part about this is you made a point earlier, which I think is really worth underscoring, and that is history is replete with example after example of societies that have become destabilized when the middle class is hollowed out and the gaps between wealthy and poor get greater. That's what's been going on both at the federal level and at the state level. And so I think for people who are looking for more stability in society, less crime and people to feel more secure, we're heading in the wrong direction simply because the wealth gap keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Was?
Yeah, I don't think anybody should be surprised by this result. If you pay even a little bit of attention or you watch TYT on the regular, you know that why do these tax policies benefit the wealthiest people in our country? Well, they're the ones most proximate to the power. In distance, they have these people on speed dial. They're the ones that show up to these fundraising dinners because they're the biggest donors. That's why. So these things, a lot of times your capitalists talk about the principles of a free market and almost like it's just nature, the invisible hand of the market. This is not some market forces at play. This is policy. We invented these outcomes. We, legislated these outcomes, and we could do the same to legislate ourselves out of it if we so chose to as a society, and more specifically as a government. And how you know that there's a way to legislate our way out of this. You guys will recall when the government wanted to send us quote unquote COVID checks. And you'll remember all the hemming and hawing that was done because they needed to means test the hell out of these COVID checks. Because regular people, God forbid a guy making 81K or a gal making 82K got a $1,400 COVID test. However, they would never apply these same principles to tax cuts. It's again, they consider those COVID checks a government spend, and folks at home, you should consider tax cuts a government spend. This is revenue that we are not capturing as a government because we're letting these rich people keep it. So it's the same thing as spending it. However, they will never, ever apply this means testing logic to the richest people in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just talking about what you were mentioning, David, about how we can focus on this at the states, and then was what you were talking about, how we can legislate this to benefit us. In 2020, Illinois had a ballot measure up to change our state constitution because our current tax system is a flat tax, as I mentioned earlier, mandated in our state constitution. And in order to change the system, we had to get 60% of the vote to agree to change to a different sort of tax system. And our governor, J.B. Pritzker, and the Democratic Party here, in fact, our Democratic state legislator had already passed a progressive tax system, but we needed to vote on it. Now, just to give people some context, it was called the Fair Tax Amendment. And it would have lowered taxes for people making below $250,000 a year, which is 97% of Illinois taxpayers. 97% of people paying taxes in the state would have seen their taxes decrease, and the state would have generated 3.4 billion with a B in new revenue every single year, because the way that the progressive system would have heavily gone after millionaires and billionaires while benefiting lower and middle income earners. Did it pass? No, it did not, because the handful of billionaires and significantly more millionaires in the state heavily lobbied against it and spread massive disinformation campaigns, so much so that people didn't know what was in the fair tax amendment. And to his credit, Governor J.B. Pritzker spent a lot of his own money trying to educate people, but the damage had been done and it wasn't accepted. And we still see the massive shortcomings we have in raising revenue through taxes in the state that hinder our ability to fund projects. So seeing that kind of defeat, it is an uphill battle, but it is absolutely possible. I guess I just want to get your guys' opinions on how conservatives particularly, but the rich in general have such a stranglehold on the narrative of taxation in this country that low income earners think that the benefits fall back on them when the wealthiest people get tax cuts, and what we can do to try to help educate people to see that they're just falling victim to propaganda.
Well, I mean, the conservative philosophy is, hey, it's our money, it's not the government's money, so we should be able to keep more of it. The problem is that you can't say, well, that's sewer system or those roads. I mean, those belong to everybody. And at the state and local level, that's where tax money, that's where state revenue goes, regardless of what the source is. So if you live in a state that has crappy roads or water problems, usually you would think, well, the fair thing to do would be to spread the burden evenly and that everybody should sort of pay the same percentage. The problem is that the percentage tax rates are not the same in a lot of states. And I think it's also worth pointing out that the political power has long been, of course, as you mentioned, not only sort of the wealthy, but also the wealthy spreading their money among Republicans. And if you look at most of the states that are having the most problems in terms of the wealth inequality gap, where the wealthy get the biggest tax breaks compared to lower and working class, they're in the South. I think it's like 7 out of 9 states, with the exception being Washington State. Those are also the places that have the worst life outcomes on average. So there is a direct correlation between giving huge tax cuts to the wealthy, making the poor pay more than their fair share, and also worse outcomes in terms of everybody's expected life expectancy, and of course, all the health problems that they have with various problems in the South.
Yeah, I think honestly, this is a battle that has to be won on the ground. We know that the money and the capital interests, they're gonna be able to co-opt the airwaves. They're gonna be able to benefit from incumbency. Just stasis is better. They benefit from the status quo. They benefit from stasis. And so it has to be a grassroots type of situation to spread this level of messaging, particularly on a ballot initiative, right? They can muddy the waters on the airwaves quite easily because they have the means to. I think of something like the Keystone Pipeline, which was this, multinational big old pipeline that was supposed to go from Canada all the way down south through the country. And people got together, both conservative, liberal, leftist, libertarian, whoever you want to call it, because it was a grassroots movement like, yo, these guys are about to poison us and our land with this ridiculous pipeline. And they defeated this thing. Lots of money involved in getting this thing done, and they found a way to defeat it, but that was a grassroots effort. And so I think that's kind of the only way you can beat these efforts, because let's face it, man, capital is very organized, very coordinated when it comes to achieving their ends.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say that every time I've door knocked for a candidate or an issue, I've always realized that I'm a sicko about politics. I am a degenerate when it comes to this stuff. I always know what's going on because this is my life. Most other people aren't like that. I was door knocking for Brandon Johnson, and so many people didn't even know there was an election coming up, or they didn't know what day they were supposed to go vote, or when the polls opened, or who the candidates even were. And so just having that kind of people power on the ground, to have those sorts of face-to-face interactions and educate people who might just not know what's going on can really, really make a difference. And I'll leave it with that, and we'll go to our first break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about how there's been some justice served in the state of Ohio, a woman who is being so wrongfully prosecuted. So we'll get to that right after this. Welcome to this social break on the Young Turks. I have to say, I love being able to, host or guest host on any of the shows. It's wonderful to get to interact with all of you in the community and read your wonderful messages. I'm so grateful to have this wonderful job that I have. And I love this network. And if you love this network, and I know you do because you're watching right now, you should become a member to support it and to support the work that we do here and to help our mission to drive positive change. And you can get an annual membership at tyt.com/join. You can watch ad-free, watch us on mobile, and additional content and so much other stuff. So come become a member, you won't regret it. And you can start help with the early members push for 2024, tyt.com/join. Also, a great way to listen to the show, the way that I always listen to the show when I'm not on it, is as a podcast on Apple Podcast. You can listen to it there, search for the Young Turks, click follow, rate us with 5 stars, and let us know what you enjoy about the show. You can subscribe to our network for ad-free listening at apple.co/tyt. And every time I remind people that they can listen to it like that, I have to say this, I used to always listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, and sometimes I would pause it and imagine what I would say if I was on the show. And now I'm actually on the show. And I think it's so funny how life works. And that's a little sweet story I always love sharing with all of you. Now, speaking of you, let's get to your comments. From the members section, Huang Jun says, "Is this Ray's first time dropping it?" No, I've dropped it a few times before this, but this was my first time dropping it John style, freestyling on the drop. Shy Coltrane says, "Ray's piloting along with a fly crew." Well, look at us. I like to think of that. Yeah, I should get a little pilot's hat. Do they still wear those? I think so. 36 Chambers Dragon says, "This is so awesome. These 2 panels are amazing. TYT has the best host in the world. Great drop, Ray. Always love seeing your wonderful smile as well with Big Waz and the Schuster. Happy Friday, TYT fam." Well, happy Friday to you as well. I am Sock. Hello, I am Sock. Says, "The guy who owns Uline moved everything just across the border from Illinois to Wisconsin just to spite Pritzker." It was quite the show of what the millionaires and billionaires in Illinois were doing at that time. Over on Twitch, Chris Huggy says, "That was the best drop I've heard," right? Well, thank you. Unfortunately, it is also true. It's gonna be about 3 degrees here in Illinois this weekend. So not super fun, but that's life. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to the Young Turks. What did I just say? Ray Vada, David Schuster, Wozni Lambre. Let's jump right into this next story. It's an update on a story we've been covering for the past couple weeks.
Brittany Watts, a 33-year-old black woman, says she went to the hospital multiple times after bleeding during her pregnancy. Watts returned home where she suffered a miscarriage. Now she's being charged with abuse of a corpse, and she faces up to 1 year in prison and a $2,500 fine.
Now, we've been keeping you updated on the story for the past few weeks, and luckily, the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office said grand jurors declined to return an indictment for abuse of a corpse against Brittany Watts. So she will not be prosecuted any further for having a miscarriage and having to experience not just the trauma of having a miscarriage, but also the trauma of being harassed by what is, I can only describe, an injustice system. So a little bit more on that. A municipal judge had found probable cause to bind over Watts's case after city prosecutors said she miscarried, clogging the toilet and removing some of its contents to an outdoor trash area, then left the house, leaving the 22-week-old fetus lodged in the pipe. So now a quick reminder of the events that preceded this. Watts had visited Mercy Health St. Joseph's Hospital twice in the days leading up to her miscarriage. Her doctor had told her she was carrying a non-viable fetus and to have her labor induced or risk significant risk of death, according to records of her case. Due to delays and other complications, her attorney said she left each time without being treated. After she miscarried, she tried to go to a hair appointment, but friends sent her to the hospital. A nurse called 911 to report a previously pregnant patient had returned reporting the babies in her backyard in a bucket. Hence why the police investigation was launched. Personally, I think the real investigation should be against the nurse who provided that information to the police and whether or not that was an appropriate phone call to make and whether or not it was appropriate information to divulge to the police and whether or not it violated privacy rights of Brittany Watts. But that aside, Ohio's abuse of corpse charge hinges on whether someone has treated a corpse in a way that would, quote, outrage reasonable community sensibilities, whatever the hell that means. However, an autopsy determined the fetus died in utero and identified no recent injuries. So as I already mentioned, the doctors at the hospital told her the fetus was non-viable. At the time of the miscarriage, the fetus was non-viable. It was not in pain, it didn't experience that. It was not alive, it was not a viable fetus. And Watts's lawyer, Tracy Timko, told the judge yesterday, Watts, who is black, had no criminal record and was being demonized for something that goes on every day. She also argued that Ohio's abuse of a corpse statute lacked clear definitions, including what is meant by human corpse and what constitutes outrage to reasonable family and community sensibilities. When the judge bound the case over, and as someone who has a law degree, has a lot of experience with judges, I always have to tell people that judges are not as smart as you think they are. And here's a perfect way to exemplify that. He said, there are better scholars than I am to determine the exact legal status of this fetus, corpse, body, birthing tissue, whatever it is. Whatever it is, that is what the judge, those were his official statements on this case. And you know what? I guess 3 years of law school, however many years as an attorney, and then however many more years as a judge don't qualify him to interpret this law. But fortunately, the laymen of the jury were sensible and smart enough to come to the correct decision that this judge, and all of his extensive legal experience and education, did not help him conclude. Now, in a statement following the ruling, Watts's lawyer said this: no matter how shocking or disturbing it may sound when presented in a public forum, it is simply the devastating reality of miscarriage. The last 3 months have been agonizing. We are incredibly grateful and relieved that justice was handed down by the grand jury today. So, Waz, I'll start with you. This story has been exceptionally frustrating because it comes, in the wake of Republicans promising for decades now that women would never be prosecuted for having a miscarriage. But at every level, the police officers, the prosecutors, and the judge in this case seemed hell-bent on making sure that this woman was punished for having a miscarriage.
Yeah, it seems to me just a lack of empathy and just decency across the board by the authorities here. The tragedy of this woman losing her child, I mean, I think that should be enough. That should be punishment enough. This idea that she desecrated some fetus or corpse or whatever is laughable. Like, who is this crime actually against? I guess I could understand if there was some public component to this, like she displayed something that the general public had to endure as well, that could be uncomfortable. I don't know. I just don't see how this could be construed as a crime against any citizen in Ohio. So just the idea that a woman loses her baby and the next thing she's going through is a criminal case is criminal in and of itself. These people need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and think about what's important to them, because this is a travesty.
Absolutely, David.
I'll agree 100% with Waz, and I'll also say that this is another direct result of what happens because of the Dobbs decision getting rid of Roe versus Wade. And that under Roe versus Wade, even with some of the court cases that chipped away at it, you could still get an abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy, no questions asked. And in a case like this, in the second trimester, where a doctor says you have a non-viable a fetus, a pregnancy, you could get an abortion under those circumstances. But Dobbs got rid of that. And as a result, states like Ohio and countless other states have said, no, you can no longer get an abortion, particularly in the second trimester. And so women like this one, who's in the second trimester, who's told by her doctor, okay, you're gonna have a miscarriage because we can't perform abortions under Ohio law because of what's been happening in the Supreme Court. So now they have to wait it out, and they have to wait out for a miscarriage, which could have killed her, by the way. She has the miscarriage. And anybody, any family, any couple that has ever dealt with a miscarriage, with a pregnancy that has not gone to term, knows how devastating that is. It's terrible. It's horrible. It haunts the mother, particularly for months, sometimes years. And to add to that burden that now police are getting involved and saying, oh, you didn't dispose of the fetal tissue properly, therefore we're gonna bring you to a grand jury. That is insanity. Thank God the citizens in that part of Ohio, the grand jury had enough sense to realize this woman has suffered enough. This case should have never been prosecuted, but it's a lesson, again, about this is what happens when the Supreme Court decides to take away women's reproductive rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And all this case has made me think is, who do they think they're helping by prosecuting this woman? How is society any better by removing her from it? Because she could have been sentenced to prison for over a year, or up to a year, excuse me, if they had continued on, if there wasn't this sensible grand jury who intervened and stopped this horrific prosecution. No one would be helped, and only people who miscarry would be harmed, because it would have a chilling effect on individuals who miscarry, being afraid to go to the hospital, because now they're gonna be afraid that they're gonna be, potentially sentenced to prison or prosecuted or, or fined or what have you. But also it creates a ridiculous precedent that, women across the country have miscarriages every day in any given place, at work, at the gym, wherever they may be, and oftentimes in the bathroom. So if you're in Ohio and you happen to miscarry at work while you're in the bathroom, then would you be forced to scoop whatever fetal remains there are out of the toilet at that place and dispose of them properly, whatever that means, because they didn't define that whatsoever? Just truly horrific.
Well, I also wonder if there's an element of racism here, because if this had been a young white woman who had a miscarriage and didn't dispose of something properly, would they have brought charges against her? Or would they have said, oh, no, we'll just, but here it's an opportunity to sort of stereotype, to say, oh, this is a woman who's black and she doesn't care about other living beings, and what a monster, and so we have to prosecute her. And that's, to me, look, I don't even have to guess. I think there probably was racism here, and that they would not have brought these charges if it had been a white woman who had disposed of the tissue in a way that a neighbor didn't like, because the police would say, but this was an opportunity for them to stick it to an African American. And I think that's what was going on here.
Yeah.
And obviously there's, this is the United States of America. There's always a racial component, but you have to wonder about the class background of the victim too. And I'm counting this young woman as a victim of the authorities here, in the sense that if this is a, like, hyper well-to-do person, you wonder if her hospital treats her much differently, and better, quite frankly. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality of our country. The more means that you have, the better care, the better service, the better treatment you get pretty much at every single part of your life. And so, you got to take all of those factors into account.
Yeah, and the way that she was demonized and the narrative was written by the police who investigated it, they framed it as though she gave birth to a live baby and then stuffed it down the toilet to kill it. That is exactly how they described it, and that is how it was reiterated by prosecutors, and that's how it was presented to the judge. And it was totally despicable. I'm glad that the charges have been dropped and she's not going to be indicted. But you're right, is a victim and deserves some serious compensation for the trauma that she's had to endure on top of the trauma she already endured from the miscarriage. All right, let's switch gears here though and talk about the Democratic Party. Democratic Party continues to show that it has no interest in learning from its mistakes or even hearing tiny bit of criticism, even from within its own ranks, because former Obama senior advisor David Axelrod spoke with Politico about how his concerns about Biden's vulnerabilities in the upcoming general election have been totally ignored by the Democratic establishment. From the Hill, Axelrod said in an interview with Politico that he finds it aggravating that people who air their concerns about the Biden campaign strategy are called bedwetters. And a lot of those concerns are rooted in Biden's lackluster performance in head-to-head polls against Donald Trump. An exclusive Wall Street Journal poll found that Trump would lead Biden by 4 percentage points, 47% to 43%, if only those two candidates were on the ballot, adding 5 possible third party and independent candidates to the mix. Trump leads Biden by 6%. But Democratic strategists claim it's too early and not without reason to be concerned about the polling. Specifically, former Obama campaign manager Jim Messina has said it's silly to be concerned about these polls, but David Axelrod disagrees. He said, I think that's deeply, deeply unhelpful because sometimes there's reason to be concerned. And there are a lot of really smart and committed supporters of Biden who have concerns. Continues on, what you need to do is contemplate what it is that is concerning people and decide what is legitimate and what needs to be done. There are people who are really, really committed to Joe Biden, who felt a sense of concern and urgency, particularly because Donald Trump is on the other side of this race. So I thought it was extraordinarily tone deaf and unhelpful. Now, David Axelrod has also expressed concerns about Biden's age, his ability to run a national campaign, as well as the changing message from 2020 and his inability to reach the voter base that helped him win the election with his messaging towards middle America. But those concerns are falling on deaf ears. Instead, White House spokespeople are likening Joe Biden's current position to that of FDR. According to USA Today, a source close to the Biden campaign told The Hill that unlike the 2012 campaign, we're coming off the strongest midterm performance of a president since FDR. White House aides often point out that Obama was in a difficult polling situation a year ahead of his re-election race and still won. Democrats, meanwhile, had stronger than expected midterm results in 2022, similar to when President Franklin D. Roosevelt picked up seats for the party in the 1934 midterm elections after guiding the US through the Great Depression. So, David, I'll start with you because I'm afraid. I don't want Trump to be president again. And I am afraid that the Democratic Party is refusing to acknowledge that this is not the same as Obama having some bad polling a year away from the election. He was running against Mitt Romney. Joe Biden is running against Donald Trump. You can't really compare those two elections, or you can take lessons from the one and apply it to the other, but they're not exactly similar situations, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that if you're running against somebody who tried to undermine democracy and has been charged with 91 felony counts, that you would have a cakewalk to beating them in a presidential election. But here we are. Joe Biden is trailing President Trump. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, you look at there's a deep divide within the Democratic Party. Last summer, Barack Obama, former president, went to the White House, I think it was July or June, and said, hey, you should really consider leaving. You have done your job. You defeated Donald Trump in 2020. Joe, you can walk away a hero. Let another generation of Democrats come in and make sure that Donald Trump can't win in 2024. Well, Joe Biden has been very stubborn and likes being president and likes his power. And so, no, he wants to stick around. Well, what you're seeing now with David Axelrod is another person who's firmly in the Obama camp saying, we've got some problems here. And he's echoing the concerns that his boss, President Obama, had. Jim Messina, who is also in the Obama camp, but is now extremely close to Joe Biden. So Messina is being loyal to Biden, saying, hey, it's too early, let's just wait. But the bottom line is this. If you look at how strong the economy is, and the economic numbers are great, and the growth on Wall Street and the stock exchange has been terrific, Joe Biden should be, any Democrat who has that sort of economic power behind them should be beating any generic Republican by literally by double digits. The fact that Joe Biden is not, that he's in a toss-up race or that he's slightly behind Donald Trump should be incredible cause for concern to Democrats because economic stuff is going so well. The economy is the #1 issue for voters, but clearly that's not enough to propel Joe Biden. A lot of people, even Democrats, look up and they see a Joe Biden speech and they think, this guy's old, and no matter what he's doing policy-wise, people still want to know that the person in the White House represents them, that it's the person who's coming into their living room night after night with the speeches and the appearances, and a lot of people don't like what they see, even if they like the policies.
I don't think it's a mystery why he's underwater. Americans have eyes and ears. David Axelrod is not saying anything radical or crazy. He's just looking at the raw numbers. Joe Biden is underwater with young people. He won that demographic by 30 points. He's underwater with Latinos, Latinx, if you will. He won that demographic last go around. He's losing ground with black voters. Of course, he's got a sizable lead with black voters, but he's losing ground there. David Axelrod is just voicing an obvious opinion. And here's the main difference between 2012 and 2024. Barack Obama could go out and make the case for himself.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is hermetically sealed wherever the hell he's at. And like he can't go out and do this. He can't go out and stump for himself. He can't go out and basically put a shine on all the great policies he's passed for his constituents. They have to basically keep this guy away from a microphone, keep him away from a camera, and he looks ineffective and weak. He looks weak. I'm sorry. People see this guy talk, they see him show up. Quite frankly, they look at how he's handling that war in the Gaza Strip right now. He looks extremely weak. He doesn't look like he's leading that situation. He doesn't look like he's leading much of anything. So to compare Obama's polling from early 2012 to this dude who doesn't leave the house is absurd. We're talking about one of the most effective communicators. As much as we hate some of the stuff that he went out and did on our behalf, but you cannot take away the fact that he's one of the most effective communicators American politics has ever seen. And Joe Biden, who looks like a corpse half the time. Like, what are we doing here with this?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I just want to remind people that this time 4 years ago, we had Joe Biden meandering around the Iowa State Fair or whatever Iowa event was going on, calling people fat and challenging them to push-up contests. That's where he was 4 years ago. And then he got really lucky. He was in a unique position. A pandemic hit. And he didn't have to do a national campaign where he was speaking in front of large crowds all across the country. And that benefited him greatly. And the campaign staff now and the Democratic Party, the National Party, seems to refuse to acknowledge that it was that unique set of circumstances that helped Joe Biden win, and that you cannot repeat those same circumstances this year, especially when your administration has said COVID is over and people just need to take care of themselves. When Joe Biden doesn't have any rallies or he's not capable of speaking in front of a group of people, you can't use the COVID defense. People are gonna ask questions, and if you can't present this candidate who's able to discuss his accomplishments in the economy, talk about what he's done for labor, then that's a problem. And I'll let you guys get the last word in on this, David first.
Just look at the guy. Just look at him, Ray. Like, I'm sorry, Donald Trump, as terrible, as awful as he is, you cannot say that he is not more obviously has more vitality and vigor and pep in his step. Yeah. Like, he's going out and he's trying to win for himself. We can, obviously, it's awful if he wins again. His cause is awful. Obviously, none of us on this call believe in, the cause of the Donald Trump campaign. But an objective observer can look at the two candidates for president and be like, one guy is going for it and another guy is hiding. Another guy is sending his spokespeople out to go out and say, South Africa is doing some trumped up trials in the UN. Right? Like, Joe Biden can't even come out and defend his own stuff. This is ridiculous. People can see this stuff.
Yeah.
I think people are also seeing what happens when you have a certain number of Democrats who get into a White House, into a presidential administration. They don't want to be the ones to say, oh, well, okay, if we have another Democrat come in, then I'm gonna lose my job as a cabinet secretary or a deputy cabinet secretary or White House press secretary or a senior advisor to the president. They love those jobs. It's addictive. There's an adrenaline rush when you go into the White House each day and you don't wanna give that up. And so I think what happens is a lot of Democrats are working for Joe Biden. They may know intellectually, maybe even emotionally, that yeah, Joe Biden is trouble, and this is gonna be a tight election if he is the nominee, but they don't wanna bring that up because they care more about their own power. They care more about the time of the life that they're having as serving in the White House. And if there's another Democrat, if it's a Gavin Newsom, whoever it is, there'll be a different crew that'll take most of these jobs. And so as a result, there's nobody who's really close to Joe Biden who's willing to say, hey, we're in danger here of losing this to Donald Trump. I think you should step away, because not only would that person be disloyal, that person would essentially be cutting their own throat in terms of their career. And they're not about to do that when you have a cushy job at the White House.
Absolutely.
And Ray, one last thing we gotta say, we have to mention this. 2016 is a thing that happened. When they ran that hyper unpopular candidate, they stuck their freaking heads in the sand and pretended that everything was okay. And she lost, she got whooped, okay? The last time they did this, there was a terrible outcome. So this idea that we're just supposed to do this, oh, the bad news, if we do this, it's not coming in. We don't have to acknowledge reality, nana nana boo boo. It's not gonna work, guys. We've done this already.
Yeah, 100%. And they can't say that Donald Trump is the biggest threat to America and then run the most lackluster candidate and lackluster campaign that they possibly can. But we'll keep you all updated on all things election throughout this election year as we all try to keep our grip on our sanity. But we got to go to our last break. But when we come back, we're gonna talk about this absolutely insane harassment story from executives at eBay. social break on the Young Turks. Let's see what you all have to say. Carlin, the True Prophet, says, funny how $1,400 COVID checks were going to break the bank, while $1 million PPE loans, many to members of Congress, were just fine. If you got a COVID check, you were a parasite. If you got a PPE, you are hardworking capitalist hero. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah, just to that point, think about how much local and state resources are still going towards investigating Paycheck Protection Program fraud right now, because they're still having to investigate it right now. Offices of inspectors general all across this country are having to dedicate so much of your taxpayer dollars to investigating that, which was fine, and it was fine to clear all those debts, but God forbid struggling students get a little bit of relief, or people who have been impacted by COVID, personally, financially, get a little bit of relief. Rainbow Bright says the Democrats and DNC are just so bad at messaging, refusing to put in the work and spending money when it comes time for elections because of their failures. We have a supermajority here in Nashville, Tennessee. Truly just sad and despicable, and I'm frustrated and I'm angry because I do think that Trump is an existential threat to this country and to democracy. And because of that, I think that Joe Biden needs to not run for re-election and let someone who can actually win have a turn. But that's not how things work in Washington. Also, for anyone who's interested in the inside baseball aspect of politics and what David Schuster was talking about with people wanting to keep their jobs in the White House. Read that full interview in Politico with David Axelrod. It gives a lot of insight into that. And we would have covered that more, but it's a little bit, like I said, inside baseball. The Throat Goat Dragon says the Trumbull County DA should have never even charged her in the first place. It's outrageous. I hope that DA gets voted out. Oh, it's despicable. It's despicable.
That's a freaky dragon, man.
Right?
Lord have mercy.
Some of the names on here really get me. Let me scroll down to Twitch. Blazing Raptor says, is the economy doing good? Really? People don't feel it in their wallet. Everything is going up in price and wages are not going up. The economy is doing better, but we're doing better relative to, not great economy. So, take that how you will. And I am out of time. Welcome back to the Young Turks. We're gonna jump right into this last story because it is so insane, and it's maybe the craziest harassment story that hasn't hit mainstream media, but you definitely need to hear it. eBay has just agreed to pay a $3 million fine after ex-executives of the company participated in what can only be described as a truly psychopathic harassment campaign. Now, specifically, those former employees did everything in their power to make an innocent couple's lives hell, including, but not limited to, sending them live spiders and a bloody pig's mask. Now, this poor couple named David and Ina Steiner wrote a newsletter called E-commerce Bites that was somewhat critical of eBay, and company officials were so mad with what the Steiners were writing. From WBZ News, the harassment started in 2019 after Ina Steiner wrote a story about a lawsuit brought by eBay that accused Amazon of poaching its sellers, according to court records. A half hour after the article was published, eBay's then CEO, Devin Wenig, sent another top executive a message saying, if you are ever going to take her down, now is the time, according to court documents. 30 minutes after this article was published, 30 minutes, and this guy is plotting his evil deeds. He was monitoring what they were saying. It just gets more insane, and we'll get into those details. So after that, ex-eBay executives did quite literally everything, and we do mean everything they could, to torment the Steiners. Along with a box of live spiders and live cockroaches, the couple had a funeral wreath with a bloody pig mask and a book about surviving the loss of a spouse show up at their door, which is, in my opinion, absolutely a threat. But it continues on. Ina Steiner received harassing and sometimes threatening Twitter messages, as well as dozens of strange emails from groups like an irritable bowel syndrome patient support group and the Communist Party of the United States. Hey, Ina, don't knock it till you try it. The Communist Party, not irritable bowel syndrome. But it also continues on. The employees also posted the couple's address on Craigslist, inviting the public for sexual encounters at their home. They posted their address and invited complete strangers over to their house for sex parties. These are top level executives at eBay. And it just keeps getting crazier because James Bao, eBay's then senior director of safety and security, at one point recruited former executive David Harville to go with him to Boston to spy on the Steiners, authorities said. Bao, Harville, and another eBay employee went to the couple's home in the hopes of installing a GPS tracker on their car, prosecutors said. Now, 7 eBay employees have been already convicted for their role in the harassment campaign. And I'll throw it to you guys. Was this, when I was reading this, my jaw just kept dropping further and further and further because this had been going on for years. This is the first I'd ever heard of it. But this is just truly despicable stuff.
Yeah, it's completely unhinged. I've never personally been this mad at anybody for anything. Obviously the spiders is scary. Cockroaches, listen, them things get in your house. It's very hard to get rid of. That's dangerous stuff they're doing. But who knows? Maybe the Steiners are into that kind of kinky stuff and would have invited the Craigslist hookup. Who knows?
There is a company out there, there's a business out there that if you want to send excrement to somebody that you don't like, you can do it. I don't think it's real excrement and I think it's fake, but it basically is a way of sending that person a message. And oh, by the way, you can do it anonymously so they can't track it back to you. That's the professional way. And I must confess, I once had a colleague that I was so mad at that I thought about sending some to her. And then I thought, nah, that's just kind of juvenile. And I wasn't an executive or a CEO or a CFO or chief security officer of a multi-million-dollar company like eBay. These guys, to me, it just suggests that whatever the Steiners were writing really, really stuck, that they struck a nerve, that perhaps the Steiners were onto something in terms of what they were writing about, and that eBay knew that they were vulnerable to these reports. And so rather than eBay just ignoring it, they just went crazy, but they went crazy in such a juvenile fashion. I'm glad that the criminal justice system stepped in and that these 7 eBay executives and staffers have gone to jail. I just, I feel badly for the Steiners. I mean, they've survived this. I hope eBay does not survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we're public figures, right? We all experience harassment to some extent. It's never been anything like this. I one time had a member of my community send me a dehydrated spider as a joke because they knew how much I hated spiders. But if someone sent live spiders and cockroaches to my house, I'm setting it on fire. That's not, I can't live in that anymore. It's uninhabitable at that point.
Yeah, I've had people be pretty pissed at me on the internet, said messed up things, try to get me fired, canceled, blah 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 blah. And I've definitely sat on my couch at times like, man, I wish I could see this person in public and give them a good smack in the back of the head. But that's about as far as it's gone. I've never thought like, how do I get their address or how do I get back at them? It's kind of just like, you know what, I'm just pretty happy in my life and keep it pushing. I think these executives, by the way, at eBay could have easily done the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they said, look, if you really want to bother somebody who's a critic of yours, you ignore them, right? And just pretend they don't exist. Or you treat them so nicely and you send them a thank you for your wonderful column and your letter, and you just bathe them with happiness, which really suggests to the critics it's like a big FU to that person. So the fact that eBay didn't have somebody advising them saying, look, here are the ways, if you really want to get even with these people, here's how you do it. The fact that they decided to go the juvenile route, the route that 9 and 10-year-olds do when they're trying to, I don't know, light poop bags on fire on the neighbor's front doorstep and then pressing the doorbell hoping they'll come out and stomp on it. Ha ha, that was funny when you were 9 or 10 years old, although I didn't engage in that. But seriously, the fact that you're an executive at eBay and you're pulling off spiders and cockroaches and funeral wreaths, I mean, that's just like, those people should never be executives of anything again.
Right. And hey, maybe the thing that the Steiners were onto in their reporting was the fact that the C-suite at eBay is just sitting around planning Home Alone style pranks and traps instead of actually doing their jobs. But that is all the time we have for this hour, but stick around because we'll be back for the members with some fun and insane stories in the bonus episode. We got one fantastic story about someone who is suing women for giving him negative reviews in a Facebook group about dating here in my city of Chicago. So become a member, hit the join button so you can get this fantastic bonus episode content. And for the members, we'll see you there.